is she talking about? She didn't know. The fuck? It's the royal family. They're the original racists.
I said Meghan Markle is, of course, a lifelong feminist, which she's demonstrated by marrying a prince and giving up her job.
Charles visited the U.S. to mark the 250th anniversary of American independence from Britain and to seek the release of a British hostage being held by an American terrorist.
The 60 Minutes interview was a great chance to hear Harry and Meghan's story in case you missed their 2-hour sit-down with Oprah or their 6-part Netflix documentary.
Very worried about their safety, which I get that aspect of things after 6 episodes. I wanted to...
Meghan Markle supposedly picked up a title nobody would exactly be lining up to celebrate Most Hated Person of 2025.
Brother's fiancée, Miss Meghan Markle, is on the American program Suits.
Yes, Wednesdays, 8 p.m, USA Network.
The only difference between that show and this is people watch.
Was it an official award? No. Was there some grand ceremony where everyone cast a ballot? Not exactly. It was more like a reputation that critics, comedians, and online commentators kept piling onto until the label started following her everywhere.
Turns out Prince Harry and Meghan Markle will still get paid millions of dollars for doing absolutely nothing. And that's just by...
And that is where things get interesting. Meghan's story has always been one of the biggest celebrity controversies of the modern royal era. She went from playing Rachel Zane, a fictional lawyer on television, to marrying Prince Harry and stepping directly into one of the world's most watched families. What happened next turned into a never-ending media storm.
On Oprah, I didn't know. I had no idea how racist they were. It's the royal family. You didn't Google these ones?
With interviews, documentaries, headlines, jokes, and endless arguments about who was telling the full story. Comedians noticed the chaos too, and once they did, Meghan became an easy target for satire. Talk show hosts joked about the royal drama, comedians questioned some of her public statements, and critics picked apart nearly every major appearance. Some of the jokes were brutal, while others focused on the strange contrast between royal tradition and Meghan's very public complaints about her experience inside it.
What is she talking about? She didn't know. The fuck? It's the royal family. They're the original racists.
Then came Chris Rock, who took a particularly sharp approach. Rather than simply throwing out a quick celebrity joke, he went straight after the bigger issue. Meghan's repeated claims about feeling mistreated within the royal family. His comedy focused on the idea that someone could enter an institution with centuries of history and then discover that it came with rules, pressure, and serious problems.
It's like marrying into the Budweiser family and going, drink a lot. Is invested in slavery like it was Shark Tank.
That contrast became the punchline. The British monarchy has survived wars, political upheaval, scandals, family feuds, and countless public controversies. So when Meghan described her own experience as deeply difficult, critics were quick to ask a provocative question. Did she really expect an institution that old to suddenly become
racist? They wanted to know how brown the baby's gonna be. I'm like, that's not racist. Because even black people want to know how brown the baby gonna be.
Perfect for her. That question became one of the biggest sources of comedy surrounding her story. Chris Rock clearly wasn't buying Meghan Markle's version of events, and judging by the reaction, plenty of people in the room weren't convinced either. His joke worked because it took a complicated royal controversy and reduced it to one simple idea. If you step into one of the most famous and heavily watched families on Earth, intense scrutiny is basically part of the deal. That doesn't mean every criticism of Meghan is automatically fair.
Trump also announced a new trade deal with the UK that will reopen British markets for American companies. All that Britain demands in return is that we keep these two.
Of course. But Rock's comedy was built around the argument that Meghan appeared surprised by the pressure that came with royal life. And his comparison made the point in a way people could instantly understand. It was basically, you cannot jump into the ocean and then complain that you're getting wet. That was the punchline, but underneath it was a much bigger criticism. The royal family had already spent decades dealing with scandals, public arguments, political pressure, family drama, and relentless media attention. Meghan entered that environment knowing the entire world would be watching.
Built electric cars, he's going to Mars. Why is he even involving himself with Twitter? It would be like if the Prince of England gave it all up just to marry an actor from Suits.
Rock's joke suggested that the institution's problems were hardly some shocking discovery. Then he pushed the joke even further, using a mafia comparison to make his point. The idea was simple and intentionally outrageous. If you willingly join an organization known for having serious problems, you probably shouldn't be shocked when those problems eventually affect you. It was harsh, but that's exactly why the audience reacted. Then Rock moved into an even more sensitive part of Meghan and Harry's story, the infamous conversation about what their future child might look like.
NBC has announced plans for a spin-off to the hit series Suits. It will focus on Meghan Markle's character's struggle to balance her legal career while also caring for an unemployed immigrant.
That subject had already exploded into a massive public controversy. Meghan had described a conversation about her baby's potential skin color during her interview with Oprah Winfrey, and the revelation triggered furious debate over whether the comment reflected racial prejudice, insensitive curiosity, or something more complicated. The people involved gave very different interpretations of what happened, and the public quickly split into opposing camps.
It's a great series about a rich, white, dysfunctional family, all scheming. Oh no, that's The Crown. That's The Crown. I'm sorry.
Rock approached that controversy through comedy, arguing that the incident had been transformed into something much larger than the original conversation. His point was not that racism itself was funny. His joke targeted what he believed was the way the story had been presented, and amplified. That distinction matters, because the underlying accusation was extremely serious. Rock was offering a comedian's interpretation, not delivering some final verdict on what actually happened. Supporters of Meghan saw the situation very differently, arguing that her account reflected a painful experience involving race and the royal family's culture.
Said racism was a big part of their decision to leave, which you know things were bad at Buckingham Palace if they came to America to get away from racism.
But once a famous comedian put his version of events in front of a huge audience, the conversation changed again. Suddenly, people who had been hesitant to criticize Meghan publicly had another opening. The controversy wasn't disappearing. If anything, the jokes were giving the debate an entirely new life. Chris Rock's jokes didn't just generate laughs. They gave critics another reason to say what they had been thinking for years. Once a major comedian put those opinions into a comedy routine, the conversation became much harder to ignore. Suddenly, Meghan and Harry weren't only being discussed by royal commentators or tabloid writers. They were becoming regular material for some of the biggest names in comedy.
Harry, whose memoir just broke the Guinness record for fastest-selling non-fiction book of all time. The story of Prince Harold and his frozen yogurt slinger is so popular, they're now releasing a version for kids. I don't know if you know about this. It's a twist on The Princess and the Pea. It's called The Prince and the Pea.
Then came Colin Jost. And his approach was different. He didn't simply go after one interview or one royal controversy. Instead, he focused on the strange position Harry and Meghan found themselves in after leaving royal duties and building a new life in California. The joke was basically this: where exactly do they belong now? Britain had become complicated for them, while America never treated them like ordinary celebrities either.
60 Minutes interview was a great chance to hear Harry and Meghan's story, in case you missed their 2-hour sit-down with Oprah or their 6-part Netflix documentary.
They were still connected to the royal family, but they were also trying to establish an identity completely separate from it. That awkward middle ground became perfect material for comedians. Jost played with the idea that Harry and Meghan were living inside a strange celebrity bubble in Montecito, surrounded by enormous wealth and attention, while still talking about their difficult relationship with the institution they had left behind. And then the jokes turned toward Harry himself. The criticism was brutal. Harry had walked away from royal duties, moved across the Atlantic, stepped back from the traditional role expected of him, and started building a completely different life. Critics wondered what he had actually gained from the decision. Was he finally free, or had he simply traded one highly controlled public role for another? Comedy pushed that question even further. Instead of being known primarily as a young prince and member of the royal family, Harry was increasingly being discussed through the lens of his marriage, interviews, books, documentaries, and public battles. One joke took that transformation and exaggerated it into the idea that Harry had gone from being fifth in line to the throne to fifth on his own wife's priority.
Harry really did that. At a movie premiere last year, he asked the CEO of Disney to hook his wife up with voiceover
list. Obviously that's comedy rather than a literal measurement of their relationship, but the joke landed because it played on the perception that Meghan had become the more dominant figure in their public story. That's the power of satire. It takes a complicated situation and turns it into one ridiculous sentence. And when a major comedy program turns your real life into a sketch, the embarrassment can feel even bigger. Suddenly, private family disagreements, royal drama, and personal decisions become entertainment for millions of viewers. The people involved may see the situation very differently, but once the jokes start landing, they can be almost impossible to escape. Then, another comedian stepped up with an even sharper performance. At the Golden Globes, Joe Coy took aim at Harry and Meghan in front of a room packed with Hollywood's biggest stars. There was no hiding from the joke, no small audience, and no quiet setting. This was a massive awards ceremony, and the royal couple became part of the night's comedy almost immediately. Coy delivered his material with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where the audience was
wants to be famous. She found the guy to make her the most famous in the world, and now she's over there and she's like, oh, this isn't what I thought.
What's the point of being famous in a castle?
Going to react. He joked about their wealth, their family problems, and their place in Hollywood, turning the entire situation into one exaggerated punchline after another. The line was especially blunt. They're just a rich, white, dysfunctional family minus anything interesting. That joke was designed to provoke a reaction. And it did. Some people laughed, some thought it was unnecessarily harsh, and others saw it as another example of how far the public criticism surrounding Harry and Meghan had gone. Normally, award show hosts have a difficult balancing act. They have to entertain millions of viewers while standing in a room full of powerful celebrities, executives, actors, and public figures. Go too soft, and the jokes fall flat. Go too hard, and suddenly the host becomes the story. Coy chose the second option. And then there was the enormous streaming deal that followed Harry and Meghan's royal exit. The reported agreement immediately became part of the conversation surrounding their new celebrity careers. Critics questioned what kind of content would come from it, whether audiences would actually remain interested, and whether the couple could turn their personal story into a lasting entertainment brand. That uncertainty created another—
If she didn't marry him, she would be on The Bachelor this season. Fighting for Prince. She would be Megan M. from Permanence barista. She's just not
opening for comedians. Instead of simply discussing the money involved, the jokes focused on the strange question hanging over the whole arrangement. What exactly were audiences supposed to get from all of this? The criticism wasn't limited to people who disliked Harry and Meghan. Even supporters could debate whether every project would succeed or whether the couple had found the right formula for their new careers. That made the story more interesting than a simple royal feud. Because once Harry and Meghan stepped away from royal duties, they were no longer just members of the monarchy. They became celebrities trying to build a business, a public image, and a completely new identity. And in Hollywood, that comes with a very different rule. If you put your life in the spotlight, comedians are going to notice, and once they notice, they're going to start writing jokes. But the American comedy circuit wasn't finished with Harry and Meghan yet. Jimmy Kimmel took his turn and went straight after one of the biggest controversies surrounding their decision to step away from royal duties, their claims about race and the treatment Meghan experienced within the royal family. Kimmel's joke centered on the irony of seeking a new life in America while describing Britain as a place where Meghan had experienced serious problems related to race. His point was deliberately sarcastic. America hardly has a spotless history when it comes to race, so presenting the move as some simple escape from racial problems created an obvious target for a comedian. Of course, that joke didn't settle the underlying controversy. Meghan's supporters have argued that her experiences were genuine and deeply painful, while critics have questioned parts of her account. Those are serious disagreements.
And he's like, no, I really am a middleman for jars of jam. He works for Meghan Markle. Yes. Yes.
Really tiny jams. Harvestable jams.
Yes, exactly.
Made from the oils of Montesquieu.
Agreements, but comedians weren't trying to conduct a courtroom investigation. They were looking for the contradictions, awkward moments, and dramatic headlines that could be turned into jokes. Then Kimmel shifted his attention to Harry's memoir. The book became another huge source of comedy because Harry opened up about intensely personal parts of his life, his family relationships, his childhood, and his struggles with royal expectations. For supporters, that honesty was the entire point. For critics, however, the sheer amount of private information made the book look like an endless collection of grievances, and that's exactly where the comedy came from. A prince writing hundreds of pages about his life was almost too easy for late-night comedians to exaggerate. Kimmel could simply point at the enormous amount of material and ask, in effect, how someone with such an extraordinary upbringing could still have so many complaints. Then Jimmy Fallon found another angle that was much smaller but somehow became even more ridiculous. a decorated pretzel bag. Meghan had shared lifestyle content showing a personalised gift presentation, including a pretzel bag decorated as part of a gift. What might have been completely ordinary lifestyle content suddenly became comedy material because of the contrast critics saw between the glamorous setting and Meghan's earlier discussions about hardship, pressure, and sacrifice. Fallon played up that contrast, and the joke quickly spread because people love an absurd visual. A wealthy celebrity carefully decorating snack packaging for friends sounds harmless on its own. Put it next to years of royal drama, interviews, and public arguments. However, and suddenly a pretzel bag becomes part of the larger debate about whether Harry and Meghan understand how they come across.
Marriage. Fuck's sake, H! Don't make me get the electric collar out.
Sorry, love. I think my arm's gone.
To ordinary people. That was the real problem for their public image. It wasn't necessarily the pretzel bag itself, it was the perception surrounding it. And then there was the constant stream of interviews. First came the major televised conversation, then came the documentary projects, then more interviews, more statements, more headlines, and more public discussion about the royal family. Each appearance was supposed to explain another part of their story, but critics often felt the opposite was happening. Instead of making the controversy disappear, every new appearance created another round of headlines. That's where the just move on criticism started becoming louder. To their supporters, speaking publicly was a way to tell their side after years of being discussed by other people. To their critics, it looked like the couple couldn't stop revisiting the same family conflict. Either way, they remained impossible to ignore. And once the comedians realised that every new interview could produce another headline, another contradiction, or another bizarre detail, the jokes practically wrote themselves. Then Stephen Colbert joined the pile-on. By this point, the criticism had grown far beyond one comedian making one joke. Late-night hosts, sketch performers, satirists, and entertainment commentators were all finding different ways to parody the couple's public image. Some attacked the royal drama. Others targeted the interviews, the memoir, the lifestyle posts, or the couple's attempts to establish themselves outside the monarchy. But here's the important part. Comedians piling onto the same celebrity doesn't automatically mean every joke is correct. Comedy is built on exaggeration, timing, and controversy. A punchline can capture how some people feel without proving that the underlying accusation is true. Still, Harry and Meghan have become such a recognisable pop culture story that their initials almost sounded like a brand. H&M. And that was the strange transformation. They had started as two people trying to build a life outside the royal system.
Suggesting? Well, I just think some people might say that your Instagram-loving wife actually doesn't want her privacy. How dare you, sir? My Instagram-loving wife has always wanted her privacy.
Somehow, they became one of the easiest celebrity subjects for comedians to parody. Every interview created another joke, every controversy created another punchline, and every new appearance kept the whole conversation alive. Or maybe they were being presented as some kind of glamorous power couple with their own carefully polished brand. The nicknames, initials, and image building all seemed designed to make Harry and Meghan feel modern, relatable, and completely separate from the traditional royal world. But critics couldn't resist pointing out the obvious contrast. This was a couple living an extremely wealthy lifestyle while trying to present themselves as ordinary people who had simply walked away from the establishment. That contradiction became comedy gold! But here's where the story takes an interesting turn, because Trevor Noah didn't begin as one of Meghan's harshest critics. In fact, he initially gave her plenty of sympathy. He questioned the royal family's rigid traditions, joked about its formal image, and criticised some of the old-fashioned rules surrounding royal life. Compared with many other comedians, Noah seemed willing to give Meghan the benefit of the doubt. He wasn't immediately convinced that Meghan was the problem. Then Harry's life outside the monarchy became part of the joke. One widely discussed moment involved Harry attending a movie premiere where he was portrayed by critics as spending more time networking than simply enjoying the event. The story centred on his interaction with Disney executive Bob Iger and the suggestion that Harry mentioned Meghan's interest in voice acting. That moment became comedy material almost instantly. Think about the contrast comedians saw. Harry was born into one of the world's most famous royal families. He was the son of King Charles and spent decades surrounded by diplomats, politicians, celebrities, and global leaders. Yet now, after stepping away from official royal duties, He could be seen navigating Hollywood events and making industry connections. To comedians, the visual was almost too perfect. The joke wasn't necessarily that Harry had done something wrong. Networking is completely normal in Hollywood. Celebrities do it constantly. People pitch projects, introduce friends, exchange contacts, and look for opportunities. But when the person doing it happens to be a former British prince, suddenly an ordinary Hollywood interaction becomes a headline. That's where Trevor Noah's comedy could hit differently. The story allowed him to question whether Harry and Meghan had truly escaped the world of image management or simply traded one version of it for another. Instead of royal protocol, there were now interviews. Instead of palace appearances, there were streaming projects. Instead of official duties, there were entertainment deals, public statements, and celebrity events. To critics, it looked less like disappearing from the spotlight and more like building a new kind of spotlight.
Time to do our daily $250,000 sponsored Instagram post for Del Taco.
I shouldn't have left the made-up nonsense.
And that became the larger joke. Perhaps Harry and Meghan hadn't escaped the machine at all. Maybe they had simply built their own version of it, with their personal story becoming the central product. Of course, that's a comedian's framing, not an objective description of their marriage or business life. Supporters could easily argue that Harry was simply helping Meghan pursue a career opportunity while making useful contacts in a new industry. But comedy doesn't always care about the boring explanation. It cares about the contrast. A royal prince approaching a Hollywood executive about a potential voice role is simply a funny image. Add the history, the palace drama, the enormous public attention, and the couple's attempt to reinvent themselves, and suddenly the joke becomes much bigger. And that's what made the story so irresistible to late-night television. Royal marriages once carried enormous political consequences. Historically, marriages between royal families could influence alliances, secure territories, strengthen political relationships, and sometimes even help prevent conflicts. Marriage wasn't simply about romance. It could be strategy, diplomacy, and power. Now compare that history with the modern celebrity world. Instead of negotiating treaties, Harry was being portrayed in comedy as navigating Hollywood parties. Instead of arranging royal alliances, the joke suggested he was trying to arrange entertainment opportunities. The contrast was so enormous that comedians barely needed to exaggerate it. That was the punchline. Trevor Noah noticed the contrast, played with it, and helped push the story into mainstream comedy. And once American comedians started turning Harry and Meghan's new life into material, the couple's image became fair game from an entirely different direction. But the American comedians were only warming up, because across the Atlantic, another audience had been watching everything unfold very closely. The British had their own opinions, their own history with the monarchy, and their own complicated relationship with Harry and Meghan. And when British comedians finally started taking their shots, the jokes weren't going to be gentle. The royal story was about to get even more personal. Jimmy Carr stepped up next, and he found a contradiction almost too easy to ignore. Meghan had built a public image around feminism, independence, and female empowerment. She talked about standing on her own and creating her own path. Then she married a prince, and suddenly she was surrounded by royal titles, tiaras, ceremonies, and traditions. Carr didn't need a complicated punchline. He simply pointed at the timeline. Here's what she said before becoming a royal, and here's what happened afterward. Whether you call that hypocrisy or simply a major change in her life, the contrast was obvious enough to become comedy gold. Then Harry's own history became part of the conversation. That old photograph of him wearing a Nazi uniform at a costume party as a teenager was brought up again and again.
Family, right, if you can imagine, they're like our Kardashian. Prince Harry is very much our Kanye. He occasionally dresses as a Nazi, and he f***ed up.
Harry apologized for it years ago, but the image never disappeared. The past doesn't vanish just because you moved to California. Then came the arguments over money, royal privileges, and taxpayer funding. Critics accused Harry and Meghan of wanting the benefits of royal life while publicly attacking the institution itself. Their supporters argued they were trying to build financial independence while dealing with security concerns and relentless media attention. The debate became especially heated in Britain, where taxpayers had their own opinions about the cost of royal life. Then Simon Brodkin took a different approach. Instead of simply throwing out a quick joke, he looked at the couple's Netflix documentary and the way they presented their story. There were serious complaints, emotional memories, and moments that made some viewers think maybe they actually have a point. But then came the dramatic music, lingering shots, emotional pauses, and Harry staring into the distance like he was filming a luxury fragrance commercial. For critics, the presentation became so theatrical that it sometimes distracted from the message itself. Instead of making the royal family look terrible, some viewers felt the documentary actually made the monarchy look calmer and more reasonable by comparison. That's a brutal PR problem! The couple wanted to control their story, but the presentation gave comedians even more material, and once the jokes started, the documentary became another chapter in the never-ending Harry and Meghan controversy. Royal protocol really isn't that complicated. You're dating the Queen's grandson, so maybe, just maybe, spend 5 minutes learning what a curtsy looks like before the wedding. That became an easy target for British comedians, who mocked the idea that basic royal etiquette could somehow come as a surprise. Then the security debate entered the picture. Critics argued that Harry and Meghan's repeated complaints about threats and media pressure became so constant that people started reacting in an unexpected way. They found themselves sympathising with the very people being criticised. That's a brutal reversal! Then Kelly Osbourne took her shot, and she wasn't interested in being gentle. Her criticism centred on the enormous gap between complaining about hardship and doing it while living an extremely wealthy lifestyle. A mansion isn't automatically a prison, a royal title isn't automatically trauma, and having problems doesn't make someone immune from criticism. Her point was simple. Most people struggle without having a massive platform to explain those struggles to the entire world. And the old photos, interviews, and public statements weren't going anywhere either. The internet keeps receipts. Once something becomes public, a PR campaign can't simply erase it. That frustration became especially strong among British comedians. To them, Harry and Meghan had entered one of Britain's most traditional institutions, publicly criticised it, stepped away from official duties, kept their royal titles, and then continued discussing their experiences in interviews and documentaries. Whether that criticism is fair is another question, but the contradiction gave comedians endless material. Then Bill Maher approached the situation differently. He wasn't simply looking for another Meghan joke. He wanted to point out what he saw as a pattern. His argument was brutally simple. Writing a book about wanting privacy, then promoting that book around the world, creates an obvious contradiction. Maher barely needed a punchline. He could just let the idea sit there. Then he compared that behaviour with Queen Elizabeth II, who spent decades dealing with wars, scandals, family tragedies, and relentless public scrutiny while maintaining a famously restrained public image. That contrast became the heart of his criticism. Harry and Meghan wanted to tell their story on their own terms, while the Queen's generation was built around enduring the pressure without publicly explaining every wound. Maher's point was simple. Dignity, in his view, comes from knowing when to stay quiet, not turning every personal struggle into another television special. And he wasn't finished. He mocked the idea of complaining about an unbearable life while living in a wealthy Montecito home and having major media deals, a book deal, and enormous public attention. To Maher, the contradiction was impossible to ignore. His message was basically, we see what you're doing, we understand the strategy, and we're not automatically buying it just because you're famous. And the audience reacted strongly. They weren't necessarily royal supporters or die-hard monarchists. The bigger issue was accountability. When celebrities repeatedly put their private lives into the public conversation, people are going to question them. Then Nikki Glaser took a completely different approach. She didn't come in furious. She didn't need outrage. She simply picked apart the public image with a calm, surgical style that made the jokes hit even harder. Her criticism suggested that Meghan's relationship with Harry could be viewed less as a fairy tale romance and more as an enormous career opportunity. The joke was that marrying one of the most famous men on earth could provide a level of attention no ordinary Hollywood audition could ever match. That's obviously an exaggerated comedian's take, not proof of Meghan's intentions. But the reason it works as satire is easy to understand. Meghan's fame exploded after meeting Harry, and that transformation became one of the biggest parts of her public story. Then Conan O'Brien found an even stranger way to mock the couple. He didn't need Harry and Meghan themselves. He used wax figures. The setup was ridiculous, but that was exactly why it worked. Their public image had become so heavily managed and recognisable that exaggerated wax versions were almost a parody of the parody. Then came another target, Meghan's lifestyle brand and its famously discussed jam products. The joke focused on the contrast between luxury packaging, celebrity marketing, and the couple's repeated attempts to connect with ordinary people. Why sell an expensive, carefully branded lifestyle product while also presenting yourself as relatable? That contradiction gave Conan another easy punchline. And once again, the joke wasn't really about jam. It was about the image surrounding it. Polished, expensive, carefully curated, and almost impossible to separate from the celebrity machine behind it. The jam became more than another celebrity product for critics. They treated it as a symbol of everything they thought was wrong with Meghan's carefully curated public image, luxury branding, expensive presentation, and a constant push toward appearing relatable at the same time. Then John Oliver entered the conversation. Oliver is usually far more measured than the average late-night comedian. He researches his subjects, builds an argument, and then delivers the punchline after laying out the evidence. So, when he took aim at Meghan and Harry, the criticism felt less like a quick roast and more like a carefully constructed case. His broader criticism focused on what he saw as a refusal to change. In his view, the couple repeatedly returned to the same complaints, the same controversies, and the same public battles instead of moving forward. That's what made the criticism sting. It wasn't simply, here's another celebrity joke. It was an argument about a pattern, but the comedians were only the beginning, because then the internet got involved. And once South Park decided to parody Harry and Meghan, the story reached another level entirely. The show didn't just throw in a quick reference. It built an entire episode around a fictionalized version of the couple, exaggerating their obsession with privacy, public attention, and their ongoing conflict with the media. Harry's memoir became a major target, with the enormous book transformed into another joke about endless complaining. The contrast was obvious. Two people publicly saying they wanted a quieter life while continuing to appear in documentaries, interviews, magazine features, and major media events. South Park took that contradiction and turned the volume all the way up. The joke wasn't simply that Harry and Meghan wanted privacy. It was that they seemed to be publicly documenting their search for privacy at every possible opportunity. That's why the parody landed so hard. It took a complicated argument and reduced it to one absurd image. A couple desperately asking the world to leave them alone while continuing to give the world new material. Once a cartoon show turns your public contradictions into a full episode, you've moved beyond ordinary celebrity gossip. You've become pop culture material. And that's a very different kind of spotlight. And just when South Park had finished taking its shot, Family Guy stepped into the conversation, because apparently one animated takedown wasn't enough. This time, the jokes focused on Harry and Meghan's major streaming deal and the questions surrounding what exactly they were producing. Critics joked that the deal was so vague that even explaining it at a dinner party sounded like a challenge. Then Harry's new celebrity life became another punchline. He went from representing the British Crown, one of the world's most recognisable institutions, to appearing in commercial partnerships and celebrity-driven projects. The contrast was almost too perfect for comedians to ignore. Critics saw it as a dramatic fall from royal duty to influencer-style fame, while supporters would simply call it building a new independent career. But then the jokes took a darker turn. Spitting Image created some of its harshest material about Meghan and Harry, using puppets to exaggerate their public personas and turn their controversies into satire. The sketches became controversial enough to attract serious attention, and some material was later difficult to find online. Claims about exactly why certain clips disappeared have circulated, but without clear evidence, those claims should be treated cautiously. The satire itself was much easier to understand. Meghan's carefully polished image of kindness, wellness, and luxury became one of the show's favourite targets. The puppet version pushed that image into absurd territory, presenting ordinary activities as expensive lifestyle wisdom. One recurring joke centered on something humans have been doing forever: breathing. Add a flower, give it a luxury presentation, wrap it in inspirational language, and suddenly something completely ordinary becomes premium wellness content. That was the joke! The same approach was used with Meghan's lifestyle branding. Spitting Image took simple ideas and exaggerated them until the entire concept looked ridiculous. The puppet didn't need to completely invent a personality. It simply took pieces of Meghan's public image and turned the volume up. Then came the Harry material. The show portrayed him as increasingly controlled and dependent, playing with the public perception that he had surrendered much of his independence after leaving royal life. Again, that was satire, not proof of what actually happens inside their marriage, but the image was designed to provoke exactly that reaction. And that's where the controversy became even more interesting. The sketches played with questions about privacy, celebrity friendships, media access, and the couple's relationship with Hollywood. The central joke was obvious. How private can your life really be when so much of it becomes public content? South Park had already turned that contradiction into a global punchline. Spitting Image took a similar idea and pushed it into darker territory. And here's the irony. Attempts to limit controversial material can sometimes make people even more curious about it. When viewers hear that something disappeared, they immediately want to know what was there. So, after years of interviews, documentaries, comedy sketches, cartoons, and endless public debate, Harry and Meghan had become something much bigger than a royal controversy. They had become permanent pop culture material. And those were some of the most brutal celebrity takedowns aimed at Meghan and Harry. But now I want to hear from you. Which comedian or show delivered the sharpest roast, and which joke went too far? Drop your opinion in the comments, and if you enjoyed the breakdown, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.